I rented a mountain cabin for a solo writing retreat, thinking a few days away from people would help me focus. The place was way up in the hills, about an hour's drive from town, then another few miles on a winding dirt road. No neighbors, no cell service. Just woods, quiet, and time. It was a small one-bedroom cabin with a wraparound porch and a steep roof, tucked into the trees like something out of a postcard. Inside, it was clean and rustic. Wood walls, old leather furniture, a stone fireplace. There was a small kitchen, a bathroom with a tankless heater, and a queen-sized bed pushed against one corner of the single bedroom. A narrow crawl space hatch was located outside on the side facing away from the driveway. The first night was quiet. I made some pasta, poured a glass of wine, and sat out on the porch for a while listening to the breeze roll through the pines. After sunset, it got cold fast. I moved inside, lit a fire in the fireplace, and read a few pages from a book before heading to bed. The mattress was firmer than I liked, but the stillness made up for it. No cars, no sirens, no city noise. I drifted off quick. The second night is when things got strange. I had spent most of the day writing and hiking. By late evening, I was beat. I cooked a quick dinner and got into bed early. Around midnight, I woke up. Not to a loud sound, but something quiet, just enough to pull me out of sleep. I stayed still, eyes open in the dark, listening. There it was again, a soft, dull thud. Then another, and another. Slow, rhythmic, like someone knocking softly, but not at the door or on the walls. It was coming from beneath me, right under the floor, under the bed. I sat up, trying to stay calm. The sound stopped. I got out of bed and turned on the lights. Walked slowly around the cabin. Nothing. I even stepped out onto the porch, flashlight in hand. The night was dead still. No wind, no animals, just cold air and trees. I circled the cabin, eventually making my way to the side with the crawl space hatch. It had a rusty metal latch, and I checked it. Still locked, stiff. I even brushed some leaves and pine needles away from the edge. No signs anyone had been near it. No footprints in the dirt. Figuring maybe it was the cabin settling or some animal, I went back inside and tried to sleep. I couldn't. I laid awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling. Just before dawn, I finally dozed off for an hour or two. The next day, I tried to push the sound out of my mind. I went for a long hike, tried to keep my thoughts on writing. I didn't want to spook myself over nothing. But that night, the sound came back. Louder this time, more defined. Knock, knock, knock. Always in threes, and always from directly under the bed. I sat up fast, listened. The sound didn't stop. Knock, knock, knock. I got out of bed and pressed my ear to the floor. It sounded like it was just beneath the boards, not something hitting the outside foundation, something under the floor inside the crawl space. I grabbed the flashlight again and stepped outside. It was colder than the night before. Frost on the grass. I walked around to the hatch and checked it. Still locked. Still undisturbed. No signs of tampering. I squatted and pressed my ear near the wood of the hatch. Nothing. No sound. I stood there for a long minute, then went back inside and tried to sleep on the couch instead. I wrapped myself in a blanket and tried to calm down. At 3 a.m., I heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. From directly below the couch. That was enough. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I kept every light on and just sat there listening, waiting. I didn't hear the knocking again, but I kept thinking about the crawl space. I didn't want to open it myself. I didn't want to know what was down there alone in the dark. By the time the sun came up, I had already made up my mind. I'd call the property manager. I drove 10 minutes down the hill until I got a single bar of signal and called the number listed in the cabin binder. The woman on the other end answered groggily. I told her what was happening, just the basics. No guesses. No wild theories. Just the knocking. She told me she'd come up to check it out. Said she'd bring a flashlight and tools. She sounded skeptical, but polite. She showed up an hour later in an old Subaru. Middle-aged, worn boots, heavy coat. Introduced herself, but didn't chat much. I led her around to the side of the cabin and pointed at the crawlspace hatch. She bent down, unlatched it, and pulled it open. Then she froze. I stood behind her, watching the beam of her flashlight cut through the dark gap. She didn't move for a good 15 seconds. Then she spoke quietly. "Someone's been down there." She climbed halfway into the crawlspace, then came back out slowly, holding a few things in her gloved hands. A dirty fleece blanket, crumpled fast food wrappers, a used water bottle, and a flip phone. One of those old prepaid kinds. Dusty, but the screen lit up when she tapped the button. She didn't say much else, just told me to go inside. She made a call from her car, speaking quietly. Later, 2 sheriff's deputies came up. They ducked into the crawlspace, stayed under there a while, and came out with more trash. A stained pillow, a plastic bag filled with empty cans, and what looked like a piece of rope. Nothing that screamed violence, but it was clear someone had been living down there. For how long, no one knew. The hatch was locked from the outside. There were no signs of forced entry, and yet somehow someone had gotten in. Maybe before it was locked. Maybe while someone was supposed to be doing maintenance and never noticed. The crawl space wasn't deep, maybe 3 feet high, and there was no access from inside the cabin. But someone had definitely been staying there, eating, sleeping, and knocking. The flip phone had a few recent outgoing calls, but they were to numbers that went nowhere. Burners. Dead ends. The police ran what they could. No ID. No fingerprints they could match. They never found the person. I packed up that same afternoon and drove back down the mountain. I didn't even ask for a refund. I just wanted to be gone. For weeks after, I kept thinking about it. Not just that someone had been under the cabin, but that they knew exactly where I was sleeping. That they waited, knocked when I was still, when I was alone, always beneath the bed. Then the couch. Like they were listening, like they were tracking my position. They never broke in, never touched anything, but they were there, just a few feet beneath me, separated by floorboards and darkness. I didn't write anything for a long time after that. Even now, years later, I check under every floorboard in any cabin I rent. I never stay ground level anymore. And I don't sleep well if I hear even the smallest sound in the night, because someone had been there knocking just under my feet, and they left before anyone could find them, and no one knows if they ever came back. I booked the cabin for a week to get away from everything. Work had been non-stop, my head felt heavy all the time, and I just needed quiet. The place looked perfect online, set back in the woods, about 30 minutes from the nearest small town in Vermont. The pictures showed a small single-story log cabin with a front porch, some old furniture, and a wood-burning stove. I didn't care about luxury. I just wanted to sleep in, make coffee, and read. When I arrived, everything looked just like the pictures. The gravel driveway crunched under my tires. The trees were tall and thick, wrapping the place in shade even though it was mid-afternoon. It was cooler than I expected, just a little bite in the air. I brought in my bags, checked the cabinets, tried the water, and got the heat going. There was a musty smell at first, like the place had been closed up for a while, but it cleared out after I opened some windows. The layout was simple. Living room straight ahead when you walk in, kitchen off to the left, and a hallway running down to the right side where the bedroom and bathroom were. I noticed the door in the hallway right away. It was on the left side of the hallway, across from the bedroom. Plain white paint, metal handle, no keyhole, just a standard interior door with a basic knob. I tried it.
Locked. Didn't think much of it at the time.
I figured it was a storage closet or maybe where they kept supplies for the cleaner. A lot of Airbnb hosts did that, left one door locked for themselves. I unpacked, made a sandwich, sat on the porch for a while. The quiet out there was heavy, but in a good way. No cars, no phones ringing, just birds and the occasional creak of the trees swaying. That night, I lit a fire in the stove and read until I got tired. I went to bed around 10. Sometime deep into the night, I woke up. It wasn't a sound that pulled me out of sleep. It was just that strange shift in awareness you feel when something's different. I lay there for a second listening. At first, I thought maybe it was just the creaking of the cabin settling that happened in old houses. But then I heard it faint movement, not like footsteps, more like the sound of someone adjusting in bed, shifting their weight slowly. It was coming from the hallway, from behind that locked door. I stayed still, my eyes wide open in the dark. I didn't want to move. I just listened. It lasted maybe 10 or 15 seconds. Then nothing. I told myself it was probably mice in the walls or an animal under the house. It was the woods. That kind of thing wasn't unusual. In the morning, I messaged the host. Nothing dramatic. Just asked, "Hey, just checking, anyone else staying on the property? I heard some sounds from the locked door last night. Just curious if it's connected to another part of the house." She replied an hour later, "No, that's just a storage area. Been sealed for years. No one else there." That stuck with me. Sealed for years. That made the sounds even harder to explain. But again, I try to brush it off. Old cabins make noise. Animals move around. My brain was probably just running wild after a deep sleep. But it happened again the second night. Same thing. Woke up to that feeling. I didn't hear footsteps. Just a small thump. Then the sound of weight shifting. A cough. Very soft, like someone trying not to be loud. But it was clear. Too human to mistake for anything else. It lasted longer that time. I lay in bed staring at the dark ceiling, holding my breath. I didn't sleep much after that. During the day, everything felt normal. Sunlight came through the windows, birds chirped outside, and the forest looked calm. But I kept thinking about that door. I checked it again that afternoon. Still locked. I even pressed my ear against it for a minute or two. Nothing. No movement, no breathing. Just silence. That night, I got more serious about it. I placed a wooden chair in front of the door. On top of the chair, I balanced an empty glass bottle. It was one of the Pellegrino bottles I'd brought with me. It was tall, with a narrow neck, and would easily tip over if anything bumped the chair. The idea wasn't to catch anyone. It was just to confirm if I was imagining things. If I woke up and everything was still in place, maybe it was just animals or old pipes, or dreams bleeding into waking. But if it moved, that night, I went to bed more tense than the others. I didn't even try to read. I just lay there waiting for the quiet to turn strange again. I must have fallen asleep at some point because the next thing I remember was the sound of something hitting the floor and breaking. I sat up fast. My heart started pounding hard before I was even fully awake. It was pitch black, but I didn't move right away. I just listened. There was nothing, not even the usual creaks. But I knew what I'd heard. That bottle. The sound was too sharp to be anything else. I got up, turned on the bedroom light, and walked slowly into the hallway. The chair had been pushed back a foot or two. Not knocked over. Just moved. The bottle was in pieces across the floor. I picked up one of the larger shards. Cold and smooth in my hand. The door itself was still locked. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat on the couch with the light on, blanket wrapped around me, listening to every sound the cabin made. Nothing else happened, but that didn't make me feel better. In the morning, I packed my things. I didn't eat breakfast. I didn't clean up the mess. I just loaded my car and left. Before I pulled out of the driveway, I sent the host a message letting her know I'd left early. I didn't explain why. I didn't ask for anything. She replied 10 minutes later. "Thanks for letting me know. I'll refund the last night's stay." That was it. No questions. I drove straight home. My chest didn't start to relax until I was about 20 miles out, where the forest gave way to open fields. I still think about that door. I still hear that sound sometimes in my head, quiet, deliberate movement, like someone lying just on the other side of the wall, wide awake. I rented a cabin deep in the mountains of West Virginia for a long weekend. It was one of those listings that looked just rustic enough to feel like an escape, but still had running water, power, and decent cell reception if I stood on the porch. I booked it last minute, needed a break from the city, from people, from everything. The listing said secluded, and it meant it. No other houses around, just thick woods all around, Tall trees packed together, so tight they looked like walls when the sun started to go down. The cabin itself was small. One floor, open kitchen and living room area, and a bedroom with a full-sized bed that faced a wide window looking out into the trees. The place was clean, nothing fancy. The host didn't leave a welcome basket or anything, just a little laminated sheet on the table with the Wi-Fi password and checkout instructions. First thing I noticed when I stepped outside to look around was that there were a lot of trail cams. At least 6 of them, all strapped to trees at different angles. Some pointed toward the trails, some toward the cabin itself. They looked like regular motion-activated hunting cams. I figured they were to catch pictures of deer or bears or whatever wandered through. It was West Virginia, probably common. The host hadn't mentioned them in the listing, but it didn't seem like a big deal at first. I spent most of the first day hiking around, trying to get used to the quiet. It's the kind of silence that isn't really silent. Wind through the trees, leaves rustling, birds calling out every now and then. It was peaceful, but there's something about being that far out that puts you on edge in small ways. You start listening harder, checking over your shoulder more than you mean to. That night, I made a simple dinner, had a beer on the porch, and went to bed early. The bed was surprisingly comfortable. I left the curtains open so I could see the stars, which were bright and clear without city lights. I woke up once during the night, not to a sound, just wide awake. I glanced at the window, stared into the trees for a while. Nothing moved. I eventually drifted back off. The next day was cloudy. I didn't feel like hiking again, so I stayed close. Read for a while, made coffee, walked around the cabin a bit. I kept looking at those trail cams. There was one mounted low on a tree just a few yards from the bedroom window. It pointed toward the cabin, not the trail. That struck me as odd. I walked up to it, saw the little panel on the bottom where the memory card slot was. Curiosity got the better of me. I flipped it open. No card. I checked another one, same thing. Then a third, higher up. This one had a card inside. I pulled it out, brought it inside, and plugged it into my laptop. Most of the pictures were exactly what you'd expect. Blurry deer, raccoons, a few shots of a fox sniffing around. There were also daytime photos of me walking around, one from the back as I walked down a trail the day before. That felt strange. I hadn't seen any people out here. No one passed by. And these weren't security cams. They were wildlife cameras set far off the trail. But somehow, they'd picked me up multiple times. Then I saw one photo that stopped me cold. It was inside the cabin. The angle was from about chest height, looking down on the bed. I was in it, face up, blanket pulled to my chest. The timestamp was from the night before, around 2:13 a.m. My face was lit up with the sharp, white glow of a flash. Eyes closed. I felt sick. My hands were shaking. I checked every folder on that card, every image, just in case I was wrong. But there was only that one photo taken indoors. I hadn't brought any cameras. There weren't any indoor cams mentioned in the listing. I stood up fast, heart pounding, and started tearing the place apart. I checked under the bed, behind the curtains, inside drawers and cabinets. Eventually, I moved to the living room and looked up. There was a smoke detector near the center of the ceiling, slightly off-colored from the rest of the ceiling paint. I pulled over a chair, climbed up, and twisted it open. Inside was a small black lens, a tiny pinhole camera. I felt the panic really hit then. Not just the weirdness of it, but the fact that someone had been inside while I was asleep. Someone close enough to take that photo, with a flash. That wasn't something the hidden cam did. It was a picture taken at eye level, and I hadn't brought anyone with me. I packed everything as fast as I could. Didn't even bother folding clothes or checking to make sure I didn't leave anything. I threw it all in my duffel, ran to the car, and drove straight down the narrow gravel road until I hit the highway. Didn't stop for gas, didn't stop for food. Just kept driving until I saw lights, people, anything. I filed a report with the rental site. Sent them the photo, showed them the hidden camera. I didn't have any proof that the host had taken the photo personally, but who else could have? They had the key. No sign of a break-in. Nothing was stolen. A few days later, the listing was gone. Completely wiped. Host profile deleted too. I never got any kind of follow-up from the platform. Just an auto-generated email thanking me for the report. I gave the police everything I had, but since nothing technically happened, no theft, no injury, they couldn't do much. They took the camera and the trail cam card, said they'd look into it. That was the last I heard from them. I changed my passwords, ran scans on my laptop, even got a new phone just in case. For weeks after, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that flash. That photo of me completely unaware, vulnerable. I didn't even know someone was in the room. The worst part is not knowing who did it. The host? Someone else in the area with access to the property. Was it just me, or were there other guests before me who never found the camera? I haven't stayed in a cabin since. I don't rent Airbnbs anymore either. Even hotels creep me out sometimes. I keep thinking about all those trail cams aimed not at the woods, but at the place I was staying, watching from all sides, documenting every move. Whoever set them up wasn't looking for deer, and whoever took that picture knew exactly what they were doing. My friends and I had been planning the reunion for months. We picked a quiet campground in the mountains, the kind with small, spaced-out rental cabins. We were able to book 3 of them, cabins 1, 2, and 4. The one in between, cabin 3, wasn't available for rent according to the front office. They said it was under maintenance. That worked out fine for us, though. We had a small group, 7 people total, and we liked the extra space. Cabins 1 and 2 were next to each other, and cabin 4 was just a short walk down the gravel path. We liked the setup. The cabins were basic. Wood-framed, small front porches, dim yellow lights over the doors, a picnic table outside each. Inside, each cabin had 2 small bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, and a living room with mismatched furniture and a dusty fireplace that didn't work. They weren't luxury places, but they were quiet and surrounded by trees. No cell signal unless you walked up toward the office. It was the kind of place where you heard every twig snap at night. The first day went by fast. We grilled burgers, sat around a fire pit near cabin 2, passed drinks back and forth. We stayed up late, laughing and talking. It felt good to be together again. The second day we went on a hike, then swam in the lake nearby. By the time the sun went down, we were all tired but happy. That night, after dinner, we were sitting outside on the picnic table near cabin 2 when I noticed something strange. A light was on in cabin 3. At first, I thought maybe one of us had gone in there for some reason. But I remembered clearly we had no key for it, and the office had said it was off limits. A single light glowed from the front window. It wasn't very bright, but it was clearly on. The rest of the cabin was dark. No porch light, no sound, no movement. I pointed it out. A few of the others got up to look. We stood there for a while, watching. Nothing happened. We joked about it being haunted, or maybe a maintenance worker staying there without telling anyone. No one seemed too worried, and we had drinks in our hands, so after a few minutes we let it go. But later that night, after everyone split up and went back to their cabins, I saw something else. I was in cabin 1, sharing it with 2 friends. One of them was already in bed, the other in the shower. I stepped outside to smoke, and while I was on the porch, I glanced over at cabin 3 again. There was movement. Not the light this time, but a shadow passing in front of the window. It was quick, but clear, like someone walking by inside. Just one person. I stared for a long time after that, waiting to see more, but nothing happened. The light was still on. The rest of the cabin stayed dark. The next morning, I mentioned it again. A few of us decided to check with the front office. It was a short walk uphill. The guy at the desk looked confused when we asked. He said again that cabin 3 was empty. No one should have been in there. There was no key checked out, and no power should even be running to that unit. Said something about a bad breaker box, and that the cabin had been used for storage anyway. We laughed it off, made a few jokes about squatters or ghosts, and went back to our day. But that night, things changed. We were sitting around the fire again, this time closer to cabin 1. It was cooler than the night before, and the wind was moving through the trees. The fire crackled and popped, and someone had music playing low from a speaker. We were telling stories when one of my friends nudged me and pointed. The light in cabin 3 was on again. We all turned to look. There was a strange kind of silence that settled over the group. We watched the cabin without saying anything. Then the shadow passed again. Just once, across the window. No shape we could clearly define, but definitely a person. The kind of movement you don't mistake. Too smooth to be a tree or a trick of light. A few of us got up. We weren't drunk, just uneasy. We made our way down the gravel path toward the cabin. It was silent except for the crunch of our shoes and the wind in the trees. When we reached the front of the cabin, we knocked. No answer. We knocked louder. Still nothing. We exchanged glances and decided to walk around to the back. The ground was uneven, and there was no clear path. Branches snapped under our feet. There was a small back window, and through it, we saw the same shadow again. This time, it moved from one side of the room to the other and disappeared, like someone ducking behind something. We didn't know what to do, so we called the police. The dispatcher said they'd send someone. It took about 20 minutes for the car to pull up. 2 officers stepped out, asked us some questions, then unlocked the cabin with a master key from the office. Inside, it smelled damp and old. The air was still musty. There was nothing in the cabin. No furniture except a single mattress on the floor in the living room. No blankets, no sheets. Just a bare mattress. And the walls. All 4 of them were covered in photos. Dozens of them. Printed on glossy paper. Some curling at the edges. Others freshly taped up. All of them were pictures of us. Taken over the last 2 days. Some were from when we were grilling. Some from when we were at the fire. A few were from the hike. One was from earlier that evening, before the sun had gone down completely, when 2 of us had walked back from the lake. We hadn't noticed anyone taking them. No clicks, no flashes. Whoever did it had been close, hiding in the trees, behind cabins, maybe even watching us through the windows at night. The officers didn't find anyone inside. No signs of forced entry. No weapons. Just the photos and the mattress. They checked the woods, drove around the property, even knocked on a few other cabins to ask questions. But no one had seen anything. They took down our statements and told us we could press charges if we wanted, but since no crime had technically been committed, no break-in to our own cabins, no direct threat, it might not go far. Still, they were clearly unsettled. We didn't sleep much that night. The office offered to let us all stay in the main building if we wanted, but we decided to stick together in cabin 2. We locked the doors, closed the blinds, and stayed awake most of the night listening for sounds. Every creak, every gust of wind felt like something more. The next morning, we packed up early. The mood was dead quiet. No one made jokes. No one said much at all. We handed in the keys and left. A few weeks later, one of my friends called to say the police had followed up. They'd found a small camera buried near the edge of the woods behind cabin 3. It was covered in leaves and wrapped in a plastic bag. It had a memory card full of photos, mostly of us, and a few others, dated weeks before we arrived. Different people, different groups. It looked like someone had been living out there, quietly, watching whoever came to stay. No one ever figured out who it was. I think about that sometimes. About how close they must have been. How many times they probably passed right behind us while we were laughing, drinking, sleeping. We had gone out there to catch up, to relax, to feel free. And the whole time, someone had been watching us from the dark. I booked a last-minute rental cabin in the Catskills because I needed to get out of the city. My head had been a mess. Too much noise, too many screens, too many people. I wanted quiet.
Just a few days to myself.
I found a small place listed online. The photos looked decent. Not fancy, just a single-level wooden cabin tucked into the trees, a little porch, 1 bedroom, and a fireplace. It was available for that weekend. I booked it late Friday night, packed a duffel, and left early the next morning. The drive up was peaceful. The farther I got from the city, the better I felt.
The air changed.
Trees thickened. The roads narrowed. It was almost sunset when I reached the gravel driveway. The host had texted me earlier. Keys under the mat. I parked next to the cabin, stepped out, and stretched. The place looked just like the pictures, but more isolated than I expected. There were no other cabins nearby, just woods on all sides, and the last mile of the road was more of a dirt path than anything else. I walked up the steps, lifted the mat, and found the key. It turned easily in the lock. I stepped inside and immediately noticed something strange. It was warm, not just stale, like a place that had been closed up. The air was warm, the kind of warmth you feel when someone's just been in a room and left. I paused at the doorway, holding my bag, listening. Nothing. Just the faint creak of the porch cooling behind me. Inside, it was clean. A little too clean. The throw blanket was folded perfectly on the couch. The coffee table had a few coasters lined up. The bed was made with tight hospital corners. It looked staged. I walked through the space slowly. The layout was simple: a small living room, a galley kitchen to the left, a hallway that led to the bathroom and bedroom. Everything in place. Nothing obviously out of order. But then I noticed a duffel bag behind the couch. I stopped. It hadn't been in the listing photos. It looked lived in, like someone had dropped it there not long ago. The zipper was open a little. I bent down and unzipped it fully. Inside were clothes, socks, a pack of cigarettes, a toothbrush, and a wallet. The wallet had a driver's license, some guy named Warren. I didn't recognize the face. I stood up fast. My body went tense. I looked around the room again, now with different eyes. The air wasn't just warm. It felt occupied. I walked quietly to the kitchen and grabbed a heavy mug, just in case. I called out, but my voice sounded thin in the room. No answer. I opened the bedroom door quickly. Empty. Closet was empty too. I checked the bathroom. Nothing. The place was quiet.
Too quiet.
Then I heard footsteps on the porch. Heavy. Slow. I froze. The front door creaked open. I hadn't locked it. A man stepped in, tall, maybe late 30s. He stopped mid-step when he saw me. We both stared. For a few seconds, nobody said anything. Then I said, "I rented this place." He didn't move, just stared at me. Then he finally said, "So did I." I watched his hands. They weren't carrying anything. He didn't look aggressive, more confused than anything. We both pulled out our phones. Sure enough, we each had separate confirmation emails, same weekend, same check-in time. I showed him mine. He showed me his. Both legit. Same host name. Same address. I felt something drop in my stomach. The host had double booked. He didn't seem angry, but he didn't move from the doorway either. I said, "It's fine. I'll go find a motel or something," and started walking toward the bedroom to grab my bag. That's when he said something that made everything shift. He said, "I've been watching you since you got out of your car." I stopped. I didn't turn around right away. I just stared at the wall in front of me. I hadn't seen anyone when I arrived. No cars on the road. No movement in the trees. Nothing. I turned slowly. He was still standing in the doorway, hands in his jacket pockets, looking at me like he hadn't said anything odd at all. I took a step back. Then another. I walked into the bathroom, locked the door, and held my breath. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I opened the small frosted window above the tub. It was a tight fit, but I didn't think twice. I tossed my phone out onto the grass, then climbed out myself, scraping my forearm in the process. My foot caught the windowsill and I almost fell, but I landed hard and rolled, got up, grabbed my phone, and ran. I didn't stop running for at least a mile. The woods were closing in. No reception. My lungs burned, and I could taste blood in my mouth from breathing so hard, but I didn't stop until I hit the main road. I kept walking, sticking close to the shoulder, checking my phone every few steps until I finally got a single bar. I called 911 and gave them the address from my confirmation email. Told them everything about the double booking, the duffel bag, the man's comment. They said they'd send someone. A sheriff's deputy met me about half an hour later. His cruiser pulled up and I flagged him down. I told him again what happened, more calmly this time. He took notes. asked me to wait in the car while he drove up to the cabin. When he came back about 40 minutes later, he looked puzzled. "The place was empty," he said. "No sign of the guy you described. No bag behind the couch either." He let me sit in the cruiser while he filed the report. I asked what would happen next. He said they'd try to contact the host, find out what went wrong with the booking. But if the guy was gone and there was no sign of forced entry or violence, there wasn't much they could do. I ended up getting a cheap motel in the next town over. Slept with the light on. The next morning, I checked the rental listing again. It had been taken down. Not marked as unavailable. Asterisk completely removed. Asterisk host profile too. I sent an email to the booking site. They replied a day later saying the listing had been deactivated due to a violation of terms, but they wouldn't tell me what that meant. I got a refund, but no answers. I kept thinking about what the man said, that he'd been watching me since I got out of my car. If he had been, then where was he? I hadn't seen a second vehicle. There were no other tire tracks in the gravel. And if he'd gotten there before me, why was the key still under the mat? The wallet in the bag. I remembered the name on the license. I tried looking it up later, public records, social media. Nothing came up. It was like he didn't exist. Sometimes I wonder if he'd planned to wait until dark. If I hadn't locked that bathroom door. If I'd stayed the night thinking it was just a mistake. I don't book remote cabins anymore, even if they look perfect, especially if they look perfect. It was late October when I decided to rent a cabin for a week up in the Appalachian foothills. I'd been feeling burnout from work and wanted a full break from everything: people, phone calls, notifications, traffic. I found a small place listed on a regional rental site. It wasn't on Airbnb or anything big. The listing was basic, but it had a few pictures of a dark wooden cabin tucked into a clearing, surrounded by trees starting to turn orange and red. It looked isolated and quiet. Exactly what I needed. I drove up early on a Monday. The route took me deeper and deeper into the woods. I passed fewer houses the farther I went. Eventually, I turned onto a gravel road that climbed for what felt like forever. The forest got thick on either side. My tires kicked up dust and pine needles as I climbed the final half mile to the cabin. When I pulled in, it looked just like the pictures, maybe even better in person. There was a small porch with a bench swing and a set of wooden stairs that creaked when I stepped on them. The key had been left under a flat rock next to the steps, just like the owner said. Inside, it was simple but nice. A wood stove in the corner, a small kitchen, one bedroom, a bathroom with running water, and big windows that looked out over the woods. There was no TV, no internet, and barely a signal on my phone. I turned it off and stuck it in a drawer. The first couple of days were uneventful. I cooked simple meals, read books, took naps, went for hikes along the nearby trails. I even tried sketching for a bit. The weather was cool but not cold, and the silence was deep. No cars, no voices, just the wind and rustling leaves. On the third day, I decided to follow a trail that started behind the cabin. It wasn't marked on any of the printed maps the owner had left, but I figured it might loop around. I packed a thermos, snacks, and a flashlight just in case. The trail was narrow and covered in fallen leaves. It dipped and rose through the hills, and after about 40 minutes, I realized I hadn't seen any kind of marker or sign in a while. I looked behind me and saw no clear path, just leaves and brush. I didn't panic, but it unsettled me. I kept moving forward, hoping it would loop back or meet another trail. Eventually, I stumbled across what looked like an old hunting shack. It was smaller than the cabin, weathered, and partly collapsed on one side. A rusted metal drum stood outside, and old tools were scattered around. I thought about checking inside, but something about it just made my skin crawl. The door was half hanging off, and the windows were covered in grime. I decided to keep moving. After another 20 minutes, I spotted a clearing and then a slope I recognized. I'd made it back near the cabin, just came at it from a different angle. That night, as I lay in bed, I kept thinking about that old shack. Something about it bothered me. It wasn't just the decay. It was the feeling that someone had used it recently. The ground around it had been clear of leaves, like they'd been swept or walked over repeatedly. There was also a dented can of beans near the door that looked newer than the rest of the trash. The next morning, I hiked back to the spot, half convinced I'd imagined the feeling. When I got there, the can of beans was gone. I stood in front of the shack for a while listening. The woods were still, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I didn't go inside. I turned and headed back. That night, I double-checked the locks. The cabin had a thick bolt on the front door and a simple latch on the back. I shut all the curtains, even though no one was around for miles. Or at least, that's what I thought. I fell asleep around 10. Sometime later, maybe 1 or 2 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of movement outside. Not animals. Heavier. Steadier. Footsteps. I sat up, heart pounding. I didn't move for a long time, just listened. They came from the side of the house, slow and deliberate. Then nothing. Just silence again. Eventually, I talked myself into thinking it was probably a deer or maybe just my imagination, and I managed to fall asleep again, but it wasn't restful. The next day, I circled the cabin looking for tracks. The ground was soft from a recent rain. On the side near the kitchen window, I found what looked like a partial shoe print. Not a boot, more like a sneaker. Too big to be mine. I wear size 9. This was at least a size 12, maybe more. The print pointed toward the woods. I spent most of that day inside. I read but couldn't concentrate. Every sound outside caught my attention. Squirrels in the leaves. Wind brushing branches. I kept looking out the windows. Around dusk, I heard something again, closer this time. Snapping twigs, heavier than any animal I'd heard before. I didn't go out. I didn't even move. I just waited until it got fully dark and then locked everything down again. That night, I didn't sleep well. Around 3 in the morning, I thought I heard the front porch creak. Just once, then silence. When the sun came up, I opened the door and saw something that froze me in place. On the porch railing, near the swing, sat a used match. Just one. It hadn't been there before. I don't smoke. I hadn't used any matches. And it hadn't rained that night. It would have been washed away if it had been sitting there before. Someone had been on the porch. Clothes. Watching, maybe. That was the last straw. I didn't care if it was just a weird local or some drifter. I packed my things in a rush and threw everything in the back of my car. I started driving down the gravel road, faster than I should have, bouncing over potholes and skidding on wet leaves. I kept checking the rear-view mirror, expecting to see someone standing in the trees. But no one was there. When I got to the nearest town, I pulled into the gas station and used their Wi-Fi to call the cabin owner. I told him what happened, every detail. He didn't say much, just said no one should have been up there. Said he'd go check it out himself. I never heard back from him. I didn't follow up. A week later, I looked up the area again. Out of curiosity, the cabin listing was gone. Not just taken down, completely wiped from the rental site. The old shack wasn't on any maps. There was no mention of it online, and I didn't find anything about missing persons or recent arrests in the area. I don't know who was out there. Maybe someone squatting. Maybe someone who thought I was trespassing. Maybe someone who just liked watching. I don't rent remote places anymore. I don't hike alone. And if I ever hear footsteps outside in the dark again, I won't wait to find out who they belong to. My girlfriend and I had planned the trip for months. We found this little A-frame cabin on a rental site, tucked away in northern Minnesota, right by a frozen lake. It looked perfect, remote, quiet, surrounded by thick pine forest. The pictures showed that one entire side of the cabin, facing the lake, was floor-to-ceiling windows. During the day, sunlight poured in and made the whole place feel warm and open. At night, though, that wall of glass turned into a black mirror. The cabin was small, just one room with a loft bed up a ladder, a wood-burning stove, and a tiny kitchenette. The bathroom was an outhouse down a short path, and there was no cell signal unless we hiked up the ridge behind the property. We brought enough food for 3 nights, a few books, and a deck of cards. The plan was to disconnect for a few days, relax, cook simple meals, and enjoy the snow. It was early January. Cold, but not bitter. Highs in the 20s. The snow had a crust to it, hard-packed and undisturbed. The first night went smoothly. We made soup, played cards, and sat by the fire. The woods outside were silent. No wind, no animals, nothing. It was almost too quiet. The fire crackled, and the glass windows reflected the flickering light back at us. At one point, I stepped outside to use the outhouse and stood for a moment on the porch. The snow stretched out in every direction, unbroken and smooth. The lake was just beyond the trees, flat and white. Not a single footprint anywhere. It felt like we were the only two people on Earth. The second night started the same. We cooked pasta, opened a bottle of wine, and sat by the fire again. My girlfriend climbed up into the loft with her book, and I stayed below, poking at the logs, feeding in more wood. That's when I first heard it. A soft noise behind me, right against the window.
Screech, screech.
It was faint, just enough to catch my ear. I turned around, expecting maybe a squirrel or a branch tapping the glass. Nothing. Just the dark reflection of the room behind me, and beyond that, total blackness. I sat back down, thinking it was just the stove crackling, or maybe ice shifting outside. Then I heard it again.
Screech, screech, screech.
Louder this time, more insistent. It sounded like something dragging against the glass, sharp, deliberate. I stood up, grabbed the flashlight off the shelf, and walked over to the front windows. I pressed my face close, trying to see beyond the reflection. Nothing. I turned on the porch light and stepped outside, boots crunching on the snow. The air was cold and still. I shone the flashlight around the edges of the cabin, down toward the base of the windows, then higher. There were no footprints anywhere. No broken branches, no sign of any animal. I checked again, sweeping the light side to side, trying to find some shape or movement. But there was absolutely nothing out there. I stayed out for a few more minutes listening. The only sound was the low creaking of trees in the distance and the faint ticking of the cooling metal stove behind me. Eventually, I went back inside, locking the door behind me. I told myself it was a raccoon or a porcupine, maybe even a bird, just something passing through. I went up to the loft and lay beside my girlfriend. She was asleep already. I kept listening, ears tuned to every pop and creak of the cabin settling. But the noise didn't come back. I drifted off eventually, more uneasy than I wanted to admit. The next morning, I stepped outside to get some firewood. The air had warmed slightly, and the snow had a layer of crust that cracked under my boots. As I passed in front of the windows, I stopped. There were 5 long scratches across the center pane of glass. Not cracks, scratches. Thin, deliberate lines etched right into the surface. They started high up, well above waist level, and slanted downward at an angle, unevenly spaced, like a hand with fingers splayed. I stared at them for a long time. There was no way an animal did that. They were too precise, too high off the ground. I walked around the cabin again, scanning the snow. Still no footprints. Not human, not animal. Just smooth, unbroken snow all the way to the trees. I even walked back and forth a few times just to be sure I wasn't missing anything. The scratches were fresh, no doubt about it. I didn't say anything right away. I just stood there for a while, thinking it through. The porch was clear. The roof sloped sharply, so nothing would have fallen from above. The wood pile was untouched. No signs of anything nearby. Eventually, I went back inside, made coffee, and waited for my girlfriend to wake up. When she did, I told her what I found. We didn't talk much after that. There wasn't anything to say. We both felt it. Something was wrong. We were supposed to stay one more night, but we decided to leave early. We packed in silence, moving quickly, trying not to look at the windows too much. I kept feeling like something might be just out of view, standing behind the tree line, watching. But every time I looked, the woods were still. Right before we left, I walked down the porch steps one last time and looked out toward the trees. That's when I saw it. There was a tree about 30 feet from the cabin, off to the left. An old pine with rough bark. Carved into the trunk, facing directly toward the window wall, were 4 words. "You see me now." The letters were jagged and deep, cut with something sharp. The bark around them was fresh, still curling at the edges. It hadn't been there before. Not when we arrived. Not yesterday morning. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't go any closer. We got in the car and left. We didn't stop until we hit the highway. The cabin's owner messaged me a day later asking why we left early. I didn't respond. We didn't post a review. We didn't tell our friends.
We just didn't want to think about it.
A few weeks later, I looked up the listing again. It was gone. Completely taken down. The pictures were removed, the location erased. Like it had never existed. I still think about those scratches sometimes. About how high they were. About the fact that there were no tracks in the snow. And I think about that message carved into the tree. Because whoever or whatever did that, they were standing just outside those windows. Close enough to touch the glass. Watching us. All night. We never went back.